So my name's Steve Tiernan, and Dylan and I are good friends. I'm also an artist, and we met through the Brisbane Portrait Prize, didn't we, a number of years ago?
Yeah.
And I obviously admired his work and reached out because I had a small piece in there as well. So, but as my day job, I'm a police officer, I'm a detective, so this is going to be a different style of interview. I don't. Firstly,
You're on camera, mate.
Firstly, oh well, I'm used to that. But firstly, I don't have to caution you, so that's a good thing. I don't have to wait for your solicitor to come. Oh, actually, he's got some representatives here already. So that makes it a lot more less formal, I suppose. But all I want to do, Dylan, is just ask you a series of questions so we can sort of get some insight into your art practice. But firstly, let me congratulate you on a fabulous body of work. It's amazing, and Jules and I are privileged enough. We own a couple of Dylan Joneses, so we're very lucky. But tell us all about this current exhibition.
So this exhibition sort of started when my partner and I moved down to New South Wales for a year. I was keen to start painting people again because the last few shows I've painted the ocean, which was great, but I couldn't stand the thought of painting the ocean again, which was ironic because I did live in Newcastle. But anyway, so what I did, I first got to Newcastle, I just asked anyone I knew to sit for a portrait. I often do that with people I know. Several people in this room, I've painted their portrait. But it wasn't really what I wanted to do, it was just a stepping stone to then start getting models into the studio and painting mostly nude models if I could. So that was sort of the beginnings of it. So anyone that sort of was even the slightest bit of an acquaintance, I'd say come on down. You don't really see any of those portraits in this show because I don't think they were sort of up to scratch, but it led into having the nude figures. And there are a few, those two over there are a bit more formal portraits per se.
Yeah.
So, but they were actually the last two paintings, so it sort of came back around again in the end. Yeah.
So a show this size, how long would this work take?
It took about 9 months, and there's about 20 paintings here, but I would have done maybe 200 or something, because I paint very fast,
Yeah.
and a lot of them don't work out. They just, because my paintings sort of exist in this space between being representational but also abstract, and if they don't fall in this sort of special moment, to me they either seem clumsy or overworked. They just aren't very dynamic, so I just have to keep painting until something works. I sometimes use the analogy, like got pretty bad foot-eye coordination, but if I were to stand in front of a goal, in front of I can't remember what they're called, the goalposts, and kick the ball, eventually I get it in. So, not to be mean to myself, but I just see myself as an intermediate painter. I'm still learning, I'm still growing, but if I keep kicking the ball, eventually I'll get it in the goalposts. So I'm just waiting for that moment.
Excellent. So how do you come up with the ideas of what to paint for a show?
It's very physical sort of... I remember at art school, everyone would sit down and read books and get their concept sort of underpinned. For me, I don't really actually read that often, just quietly. So I just thought, well, if I can't read, I may as well just get in there and paint. So the concept sort of just comes from the act of painting. I sort of get anxiety if I don't paint. I'm like, oh, what if I forget how to do it? So it doesn't really matter what it is. I just put something in front of me or make something up, and then it will lead to a series of work. The studio I was in Newcastle was probably half the size of what I have in Brisbane. So it's kind of quite funny that this show kind of honours the room, but it was really just a large bedroom, and that annoyed me to begin with. But then I thought, how can I make it work? And it had really great light, the studio, so I knew what time of day was better for painting a model or painting a bed or a chair. So the beds and chairs definitely came later, in between the models leaving and then having occupied that space. And I had painted beds and chairs several times previously. The first nude show I had in 2018, I planned to have a similar show to this fact, I've planned to have this show many times, but I've never been able to mingle the two together.
Yep.
So yeah, this is what we have.
No, you can see the intimacy in a lot of the paintings. Obviously, even in the beds and the chairs when there's no human figures in them. Explain your process to us and how you would go about starting a piece of work and working through it.
Yeah. So usually I find a pose that I think has something to it. It might just be a little drawing. The drawing might not even be necessarily good, but there just is some dynamism to it. So I try and go, okay, how can I make that into a painting? And that second last or penultimate painting there, it's actually of my partner Mia. I've tried that painting throughout the years so many times, and I finally got it. And I had to figure out all the problems. Painting's like anything else, you're just figuring out problems. And you read things about other artists as they get older, and they say the problem is you just keep finding more problems. So that's probably my favourite painting in the show. When I made that painting work, it was just fantastic because I tried it so many times. And what I realised for that painting in particular is my partner has a very pale skin tone. So because she was lying down, there was too much light above her. So I actually turned off all the lights in the studio and I just used the natural light. So we did it in the morning. And I put a dark green sheet below her. So for me to make a painting work isn't like a spiritual awakening. It's often just like, going through the motions, like whatever it may be. Yeah.
And obviously, since we first met, you've become a father.
Yeah.
And how has that changed your practice?
I think I'm definitely better at painting at any time of day. I don't care if I'm at the studio at 4 a.m. on there. I get there at 11 p.m.
Yeah.
It forces you to be a bit more scattered and a bit more loose. And I think that also helped me paint even a bit faster. I keep wanting to get better at portraits. I think portraits are, for me, the hardest subject matter because I think the general public do scrutinise portraits more, particularly because my paintings live in a realm of realism that I do want it to look like a person. So that becomes tricky. But for this show, I felt really proud because the things that were hardest to paint for me are actually the objects, the beds and the chairs, which didn't annoy me because it actually meant that I was getting better at painting people. Whereas if I were to do this show 5 years ago, it would have definitely been the other way around. I think painting the objects is harder because the person isn't there. But going back to what we talked about, that's why I've painted objects that people have such a response to, such a relationship with. The beds, I tried not to interfere with the beds once the models left. I did a bit of tweaking, I wasn't too hard on myself, but I tried to do it quite quickly after they were there. It wasn't always the case, but there was something beautiful that happened. But if you did a good painting of a person and then you did another painting of a bed or a chair and it worked, it didn't often happen, but the few times it did, it was a great sort of feeling, for lack of a better word.
So there's definitely that essence there, and especially in a lot of the life paintings. And I believe your practice, you paint from life all the time. Is that?
Yeah. So particularly figures. My last few landscape exhibitions were from memory because the places I was painting in, I was very familiar with. It was Moreton Island, and before that was the Sydney Harbour. Tough life when you're very familiar with the Sydney Harbour, I guess. But anyway. But with people, I probably put too much pressure on myself sometimes, so I still need that line of sight. There we go. With the figure there, I'm definitely better, like that male figure there above my lovely cousin Amy. That's made up, but I know that model, Takashi. He's modelled for me in several series of work. I know him so well. I just found this little doodle. And I thought I'll use that drawing and see where it goes. And I actually didn't like that painting to begin with because I probably didn't back myself that it was up to scratch, but I know it's one of Jan's favourites and a few others. So I'm getting better at making things up. And you'll see in the chair painting there, and then also the lady with the beret hat on, there's actually little paintings of mine on the wall, and I just made those up from previous shows. So, like, that wasn't groundbreaking, a painting in a painting, but that was very much a compositional decision. If those paintings weren't on the wall, the painting wouldn't work. So sometimes you need a painting to fix a painting. There you go.
And you know, from experience, I know, especially certainly with portraits and figurative work, it's a lot about what you leave out also. And I think that's why that one really works. I find it works too. So how do you come up with that? Is that just experience, or?
Yeah, like I used to paint really quite realistic at art school. For anyone who follows my work, and I can do that. I can paint quite realistically, but I didn't think it was very strong, the work. It was competent, but I find it really exciting when I can express to someone in, some of these paintings might have 30 paint strokes in them, that's a person on a chair, there's their hand, there's a towel on the wall or a dressing gown. The great thing about the human mind is that we're a bit lazy, so we make things up on our own accord. So I don't need to tell you everything in order for you to get the message across. And it also means that everyone has a different idea about it. Like, that's a beret on her head, but some people might think it's a frisbee. But this show in particular, I really wanted to get better at painting hands and painting portraits. Because whether it was subconscious or not, my first figurative show, I look back and there's a lot of faces not there, which I will admit for the viewer sometimes that's less intimidating. But for this show, I really wanted, half of the paintings to have, well, that's that person and they're looking at me or looking at somewhere in the room. And then also just getting like that, not all of you can see it, but that painting with my partner down the end there reading the book. That was the first painting I've done in years where I had to actually do it in 2 sittings. Most of my paintings, all my paintings happen a la prima or in one go. Whereas that painting, I remember Mia lay down and she could tell I was a bit sort of anxious about painting it because there's a lot of elements for me in that, but I still wanted to be simple. So she said, how about, she's very great partner to have, she's very respecting my process but also giving me some advice. She said, how about just do the face today, and if that's all you do, great. So I just tried really hard to paint a portrait, and to be honest I actually slightly lost her. That's not the best portrait I've ever done of her, but I was really happy with that portrait in its own way. So I just let that portrait dry, and then a day or 2 later I came back and did the rest of the painting. But once again, if I tried to do that painting years ago, I'd painted that portrait and go, oh no, it doesn't look like me, and scrape it off. Like I painted Rick years ago, I remember doing this painting of him. Rick's this lovely fellow in the middle. And it was only, I thought, about 3/4 of the way there, and every once in a while it sort of pops up on my phone as a memory. I go, God, I stuffed that up, I should have just left it. So the more you paint, the more you try and hopefully get better at knowing when to stop, because it could be in the first 20 seconds, it could be 20 minutes, for some people it can be 200 hours. So for me, usually it happens quite quickly. So that's why I actually hid that painting away with down the end there, the bigger painting, for a couple of months. I didn't like it, particularly because it's more detailed. But my friend Chris, who's in that painting during the book and then in the hat there, he came to my studio and he said, what's that painting there? And I said, oh, it's nothing, Chris. And he said, no, it's something. And I actually brought it out. I thought, oh, you're right, Chris. So having people in the studio, I actually enjoy, because whether it's warranted or not, people do give you an opinion. And most people give me an opinion I respect, and it's constructive. It doesn't mean I'm going to take it as gospel, but it's always interesting getting another view on something. Like also for Chris, that painting might not be in the show. I might have just left it in that room, and who knows. So, yeah.
So you also teach, and you run courses and so forth, painting courses. What's one thing you would say to an emerging artist to help them? with their career?
Find a really rich partner. I went to art school, which is great,
Yeah.
but in hindsight, I didn't really fit into the artist image. Like a lot of people would think I'm weird, but at art school, I kind of was like the accountant. You know, I was quite down the line, and I'm not a big drinker. I didn't do drugs. Nothing wrong with those things if you want to do them. So I just think putting in the work, and once again, I actually nearly didn't pass second year painting. I remember my teacher, who's a great artist in his own right, came up to me and said, "Dylan, you know, you've got to start moving things along. We just started painting with oil paint," and I couldn't figure it out. I just kept on trying, and once again, I don't consider myself the best artist, the most amazing artist, but you just put in the work. And I think any emerging artist, just find something you're excited about and honour the mark you make. Like I could paint quite neatly, but it wasn't who I am. I'm a bit sort of scattered and a bit sort of embracing the moment. And I think when I decided to do that with my painting and the paint strokes, that it worked much better rather than trying to, you know, particularly as a male boy at an all-boys school, you see all your mates trying to draw this really neat painting of a dolphin coming out of the water in a sunset. You can get very stuck. So the moment I went, okay, let's just loosen up a bit. And that was probably the first show I had with Jan where I really loosened up. Creature of Habit was called, when I painted the suburbs. But I went, okay, this is how I want to paint. And really, at the end of the day, I'm a tonalist. Tonalism came after Impressionism, Clarice Beckett, and that crew of people. However, I sort of have this, you know, Ben Quilty, Ewan McLeod paint aesthetic. So you can definitely steal and borrow, and that's okay. I don't know if I really answered the question about giving advice or workshops, but yeah.
No, definitely. I even from that there, I took something away. But obviously, your strokes are quite big, and so when did you start using like really big brushes? Was that obviously when you started to try and loosen up a bit, or?
Yeah, I did use palette knives to begin with, particularly that first series at Jan's. But the problem with the palette knife is it's limiting.
Yeah.
I think, because it gives like a clean surface, unless you keep disrupting it. Like Jun Chen does that, but he paints over, you know, weeks for a painting. But for me, it didn't have that sense of immediacy. I painted this series of boats, and the palette knife was too clean, so I started using these big paint brushes from the hardware. They were really good, but they were a bit brutal, mostly hog hair.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of palette knife still with it, and I just phased it out. So I remember that show with Jan, the last Morton show, some of the work was quite big, and the paintbrush I was using was this big. It seemed a bit ridiculous to me, but when I made that thing work, it was perfect. So I'm not trying to, it's not like, oh, I use big paintbrushes, look at me. Just, I'm trying to simplify things, and if I can get it down in one stroke, I think it's more intriguing than going, you know, there's the shoulder joint, there's this. And that's why there's so much, I won't use the word failure, but so many paintings that don't work. For me, it's mostly because of that use of big paintbrushes. And that's why the chairs were so hard, because I did not let myself use a paintbrush that was, you know, as wide as the timber.
Yeah.
I went, okay, I'm going to have to use a big paintbrush, but use it on its side and then cut back into the chair. Why did I do that? I don't know. But I actually remember telling Sam one day about the rules that you set yourself as an artist sometimes. And for some reason, I've set that as a rule for myself. And there's this one paintbrush in my studio I have to hide away from myself. I don't know why I don't throw it out. Anyway, and I tried painting the chairs with it. It's about that wide. And they were okay. But then when I used a big wide brush that was thin and used it on the side, the paintings were better. So it has that sense of fragility and confidence and instability and all those words, because I'm not a precise person, I'm not a precise painter. So, yeah.
So what's next for Dylan?
just keep painting people. Anne's sitting for me on Wednesday, 1 p.m. Takashi in that painting there, that male figure, he's sitting for me tomorrow at 12:30. So
Is that we've done him?
yeah, we're painting together.
Yep.
So I'm enjoying painting people again. I will admit I find it harder to paint people in landscapes, not just the act of painting, but just it takes more of an emotional toll. But I'm enjoying it, so I'm going to go for it. I'm enjoying painting portraits, so maybe that will lead into painting something for a prize, but I don't put too much pressure on that. So just painting people. I don't know if I'll paint beds of chairs for a while, but maybe a futon or a beanbag or something. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So with your portraits, when you're doing a portrait, and we've painted each other. So what do you look at for? Where do you start? How do you start?
Great question. Great question. My brother told me to say that when I didn't have an answer. Well, it's funny. I think you said the same thing. Did you start with the nose?
I sometimes start with the eyes.
Yeah. Well, I have a big nose, so maybe I look for that in other people. I don't know. But I don't have too much of a plan. Do you sketch it all out?
I've tried it, like where you just do the sort of the shape of the head, and
Yeah.
then you sort of mark it out. I tend to do that if I'm sketching fast,
Yeah.
but then I'll focus in on a specific area.
Yeah. I usually, what I first do is have really thin paint, just with a bit of burnt sienna, which is like a terracotta colour. And a big part of my painting is cropping the figure. Like, on that third last painting there, head's chopped off and a bit of a hand, but I purposely honoured that because the painting's more interesting.
Yeah.
Once again, the viewer's having to make up, is she holding a bottle of beer? You can't see it. Who knows? Is she wearing a hat? Who knows? So often I probably make it too zoomed in, but I go, actually that's much more interesting painting if I were to include everything. And when it comes to the portrait, I'm not formally trained in portrait painting, so I'm just trying to figure it out. And I scrape it off, try again, scrape it off, try again, until usually I do want to try and get the foundations of the person there and see, I've captured Jeremy or whoever. I don't actually know anyone named Jeremy, but let's say that Jeremy. And then I'm trying to get that thick application of paint on top. Funny thing is, sometimes you nail the sketch and it looks exactly like them, and then you start painting, and then you lose the person. So I have tried doing the opposite, where I just put the paint down and try and find the person in the paint, but I haven't quite figured that one out yet. But I'll let you know when it does. Yeah.
And finally, Dylan, you mentioned a couple of artists already who you sort of take inspiration from, I guess. Who are your artists of influence that you look at?
Well, on a grand level, I'm lucky to have so many great artists, some of who are here today in Brisbane, and we all meet up, and we all have such a different approach to art. Abstract painters, realistic painters. I think that's really helpful, having a crew around you. And that's something that in Newcastle I struggle not having. I tried to get it going, but it was a bit harder. Maybe I'm getting older. And then obviously there's all the famous artists I looked at art school and still now. The funny thing is a lot of my favourite painters are very abstract painters, particularly 1950s in America, Diebenkorn, de Kooning, Rothko. I don't really, when I've been overseas, I don't really get that moved by seeing a Leonardo. I'd much rather go sit in a room and see a Mark Rothko, which I'm looking at that painting on the wall behind the lady with the beret. Take the tree and the little stick out. It's a homage to Mark Rothko in a way. So I would one day love to be an abstract painter, but maybe I'll get there eventually.
That's excellent. Well, thanks, Dylan. Look, I don't have too many other questions. If there's anything from the floor that anyone would like to ask Dylan, whilst we have him. It's the most confessions I've ever had in an interview. So.
Well, it's all on tape, mate.
In my 34 years.
Easy enough. Thanks, Bud. Really appreciate it. And thanks for your support.
Thanks.
Cheers, everyone.